My name's Chris and I repair my own audio equipment, and I also show you how to repair yours. So let's get started. The Nakamichi LX-5 is stealth in appearance but can compete against any cassette deck, including my Nakamichi Dragon. Ruler flat record playback response with any tape type from 20 Hz to more than 20,000 Hz. Smooth operating transport controls using an early microprocessor controlled system along with a motor and cam configuration makes for a quiet deck without a need for solenoids. Dolby B and C are included, as well as equalization and bias controls. The tape counter is a 4-digit LED display and 16-segment LED indicators calibrated from -40 to +10 dB. With new belts and servicing, this LX-5 can operate at the highest level that the cassette tape format is capable of. I'll show you the disassembly, the bench testing, and the operation of this amazing cassette deck that can hold its own against any cassette deck ever produced. The Nakamichi LX-5 can make a recording that is virtually impossible to distinguish from the source. What more is there to ask for from a cassette deck? Let me now introduce you to my remarkable Nakamichi LX-5. If you haven't already, please subscribe. I used my Sound Technology 1510A as well as my Kenwood FL 180A to go through the testing of this Nakamichi LX-5. But before I got to the testing phase, I did some work on it. And I'm going to show you what I did to the unit as well as the testing of the unit a little bit later on in the video. But right now I'd like to just run over the features of the Nakamichi LX-5. And before I run through its features, I'd like to let you guys know that I purchased this LX-5 about 10 years ago for $90 here locally. Boy, how prices have changed. The Nakamichi LX-5 was produced from 1981 through 1984 and had a list price of $850. It's a 3-head cassette deck, so you're able to monitor the source as well as the tape at the same time. So that's nice when you're recording, which is really a nice feature because whatever you're recording, you can listen to it exactly as you're going to hear it off the cassette deck. It was pretty early on of the digital tape counters and the digital output meters. They were around, but they hadn't been around too long, so they had that. Kind of an interesting thing about this deck, it was right at the time when the silver face equipment was going away and the black face equipment was coming. And I guess Nakamichi couldn't decide what to do, so they did it kind of half black and half silver. But I think it looks good. It's a really sleek looking, a really good looking unit. Most of the controls are behind a door in the front. It's very smooth operating. It's just a very nice deck. It can handle just about any type of tape, from a type 1 up through a metal tape. It's an early microprocessor controlled transport, so it's quiet. It works very well. It's interesting, in one of the brochures I saw on it, they really touted their 4-bit advanced microprocessor that controls the transport. But this is 1981. It was state of the art for cassette decks at the time. As I mentioned, this LX-5 will handle most tape types. The type 1, normally that would be marked and it would say something along the lines of normal bias. Then you have a type 2, the next step up, and those you normally would be marked high bias. And then you had the type 4s, which were metal tapes. As I mentioned earlier, you've got switch settings for all 3 of those tape types. The type 1, the type 2, and the type 4. Now, what happened to type 3? Well, there is a type 3, and that's the one tape that this unit will not support. That was a tape formula that was come up with that supposedly was going to combine the best features of type 1 and type 2, and they called it type 3. Well, it was short-lived, and this deck does not support that tape type. Metal tape came along, and that pretty much put the nail in the coffin of the type 3. The LX-5 also has individual left and right input level controls. It has an output level control. It has an MPX filter, which you use that if you're recording FM stereo material. Any other time you'd leave it off. It has a timer function that allows you either to record or to play. Now, I've never used the timer function on any tape deck I've ever had. You may find that useful. It has a Dolby B and C, which was pretty standard for the time. So it's got pretty standard controls. It's got enough, but it's not overly complicated, but it's got all the controls you need to make a good recording and play it back well. I restored this LX-5 many years ago, long before I was doing any type of YouTube videos. So I don't have any video of me restoring this particular unit, but I do have pictures, and really the only reason I have pictures, those were for my own use. I didn't take them thinking, well, I'm going to do a video someday, or I'm going to show somebody else what I did. I took those pictures like I recommend you all do if you run into trouble. So these pictures were all done when I was taking the transport out of this LX-5 to change the belts out. The belts were bad, and not a surprise, right? Rubber belts, they're always bad in any type of piece of equipment, and certainly in cassette decks, those almost always have to be replaced, especially a deck this age being 40 years old. And getting belts is no easy matter in today's world. It used to be you could call the service center for whatever deck you had, and they'd send you an OEM belt, no problem. Well, in today's world, finding belts, or finding belts that work, more specifically, is difficult. I've dealt with vintage electronics before. There's a guy named Bob in Colorado, and he's got a website, and the website's vintageelectronics.net. So that's where I go to get belts. I know there's plenty of sellers on eBay, and this is where you guys can help me out and help fellow vintage audio enthusiasts who have tape decks. Where do you get your belts? If you could put down below in the comments where you get your belts, that would be great. The transistors, capacitors, diodes, etc. that are used in this unit are the same as any unit from this era. So any of those components are easy to find. You can get your parts at Mauser.com, at Digikey.com, and you're going to find 98% of the standard components that you're going to need. It's just those belts that are difficult to find for tape decks. In many of my videos, I'm talking specifically about the unit I'm working on, but I think with this LX-5, not having that video that I have many times, this is a good opportunity to just talk in general about working on tape decks. And you know, tape decks, for me, they're tough. They're tougher than receivers, and they're tougher than amplifiers and preamplifiers, because you've got a whole nother side to them, and that's that mechanical side. Really, in a receiver, an amplifier, preamplifier, you've got a bunch of screws you got to get out of the way so you can get in there and work on them. And that's about the only thing mechanical you got in them. I have had to take apart switches and that kind of thing, as I showed in my Sony TA88B preamplifier video. I do have to take apart some mechanical things in those units, but tape decks, you're going to get into something mechanical as soon as you start messing with them. E-clips, C-clips, springs, little washers, some that are nylon, you can't even see them. So if you don't even know they're there, you can lose one. And in a tape deck, unlike a receiver case, you lose a washer from your case on your receiver and you put a screw back in without the washer. What's the big deal? Now, it would bother me personally, but a lot of people, it wouldn't bother them. Well, it's going to bother that tape deck, whether it's a cassette or an open reel deck or an L cassette deck, any kind of tape deck. It's going to bother it. You think, one little nylon washer, what can that do? A lot. So you've got a whole nother ball game involved with a tape deck. Add to that, to set up these analog tape decks, you really do need specialized equipment. You can get by with just changing the belts out, but you really don't know how it performs. But with saying that, I understand there's not technicians around like there used to be. A lot of you guys are on your own like I am. You just got to fix your own equipment. And is it worth going out getting specialized test tapes and test equipment just for your cassette deck or your open reel deck? Probably not. If I was in that position and I needed belts, I'd just get a belt kit and go for it. And if it sounded good, that's the way it would stay. In today's world, we don't have the selection we used to have to get our equipment fixed. I'm going to show you a summary of all three tape types, the Type 1, the Type 2, and the Type 4, when I tested the LX-5 with my Sound Technology 1510A. But I want to show you one run of how you use this piece of equipment. It'll do many different things. So one particular thing it'll do, something that's very important to most of us, which is the frequency response of a tape deck. I want to show you using a Type 1 tape, the frequency response test that this 1510A can do. I'm going to run a sweep test now using a Type 1 tape. It's a 90-minute Sony. Put it into the LX-5, and I'm going to put it into record pause mode. It's ready to record, but it's just waiting for me to hit the play button. And down here on the ST1510A, it's ready to go. And all I have to do is first I have to start the LX-5. Then what I have to do is select frequency response. And then what I have to do is to start this. And you're going to see, hopefully, the right channel will be the first line coming down through. When it's finished, then it's going to come with the left channel. And it starts at 40,000 hertz and goes all the way down to 20 hertz. So here we go. You may be able to see that line. And I don't know if that picked up that sound or not, but that's the frequency sweep. It's starting at a high frequency and then going to a low frequency. Right now it's almost down here to the end. A few more seconds and the right channel will be done. And then it's going to do the left channel. And you're going to see over here at the right, you're going to see a line come up here. There it goes. You may be able to see that, and it's riding just about on top of the other line. So the right channel is riding just about on top of the left channel. And it'll be done in a few seconds here. And again, you may be able to have heard those frequencies. As I said, it starts at 40,000 hertz. There's no deck that's going to do that, no commercial deck anyway. And there it's done, it just stopped. So I'll stop the LX-5, we don't need him any longer, and this is stopped so we can look at it. It's at 1 kilohertz right now. Have a little cursor position switch that I can move up and down. See if I can keep my hand out of it. And I'm just going to move up here toward the top kind of quickly. But these are all the different frequencies. So 20 dB, 18.9. We're within just a little over a dB a channel at 15 kilohertz. And this is a Type 1 tape. So let me move it up here some. We're at 20 kilohertz. And these two channels are within a dB of each other. Let me go up a little higher, 21. 22, the left channel has no data. The right channel still holding in there. So up through 21 kilohertz. You can see this is darn flat. And again, we can go down through all these frequencies. This over here is, as I'm moving this to the left, we're looking at different frequencies here, and I'm not sure if you can see this part here, but these are all very close. And I'm just going to zip down here to the other end. So here I'm down at 100 hertz, and I'm at 19 dB and 18.8. Boy, these two channels are tracking darn close together. I mean, just isn't going to get any better than that. And what you can do here too is split these channels. There's a little button here. It split them so you can see them a little bit better. You can expand. Well, first of all, let me tell you what you're looking at here is 10 dB per division. Quite a bit. When you hit this expand button, now it's 2 dB per division. So only 2 dB. Now you get to see a little bit of difference in those channels, where these channels are off a little bit in different spots. So we get it back up here on the high end. Let's get here. Now it looks like there's a big spread now because we've magnified in on this, but there's just over a half of a dB. So that's awful good. You know, so from 21 kilohertz down to 20 hertz, you're within no more than plus or minus 2 dB. So you can't ask for more than that out of any tape, frankly. And a Type 1, that's outstanding. So I just wanted to show you that, show you an entire process of how that works, and give you an idea of how nice this machine is. It's just fun to play with. I enjoy using it. It's just a lot of fun to see different tapes. Now, not every Type 1 tape is going to perform as well as this one. Why did this one? I don't know. You know, is it Sony's tape? Maybe it's Maxell tape and a Sony cartridge. I mean, who knows? But not all Type 1 tapes perform this well, but this tape in this deck is outstanding. So, and it's just for me a lot of fun to find that out and to mess around with it and to try different tape types, different decks. So this ST1510A for me is just a wonderful piece of equipment, and I've had it a long time now. I don't know, I've probably had it 10 years or so. Bought it used on eBay, of course, and it's something that's been around since the early 80s. So it's vintage in itself, but it's a great piece of equipment and will do a lot of different tests. You may have noticed that I ran these tests at the minus 20 dB level, and you may ask, well, why? Well, that's the way Nakamichi and almost all cassette manufacturers spec out their decks. If you look in your owner's manual, you'll see they'll give you the specifications for the frequency response for your unit, like they do for this LX-5, and it's at minus 20 dB. Now, who records at minus 20 dB? Nobody does, right? You run it at about 0 dB. Depending on what tape formula you're using, you always record about 0 dB with some peaks going a little bit higher, maybe plus 3 dB or plus 5 dB. You never record at minus 20 dB, but they do that because these decks will perform better at that level than at a 0 dB level. But on the upcoming tests that you're going to see, I tested this unit like I do most of them at the 0 dB level because that's where I record at. So I just wanted to mention that about this deck, and it's not just this deck, it's about any of them, that they always spec out their decks at minus 20 dB. Before I continue on with the testing using the Sound Technology 1510A, I want to show you another tool that a lot of you guys may be able to obtain that'll help you with tape decks. A wow and flutter meter is something you guys may consider if you're getting into repairing cassette decks. They're a real good tool for giving you a general idea about if the deck that you have is running to the correct speed, as well as handling the tape correctly, the tape path's working well. If you get a good number with your wow and flutter and your tape is running at the correct speed, you've got a good chance of making a good recording. It doesn't allow you to do some of the other adjustments that may be needed in your deck, but a lot of times that's all you need, and you don't have to get in there and adjust the heads and do that type of thing that another piece of equipment like the ST1510A can do, or an oscilloscope. It can tell you a lot about the health of the transport that you're working on. Test tapes are another important part of testing and setting up a tape deck. Years ago, every manufacturer supplied test tapes for their equipment. Nowadays, you have to get them from third-party suppliers like I have. Because I won't go into them too deeply, but in a nutshell, you have to have a known starting point. And these tapes that have been recorded on specialized equipment give you that known starting point. So I just wanted to share with you a lot of the different sides of working on tape decks. Working on other pieces of equipment like a receiver, an amplifier, preamplifier. If you've got a digital multimeter and an oscilloscope, you're probably good to go. You can fix about anything. With a tape deck, whether it's a cassette deck like this one or an open reel deck or any type of tape deck, there's a lot more to it, and it just takes a lot more specialized equipment. So let me get back to the 1510A here. I showed you a complete run on the Type 1 tape, and I'm just going to give you a summary of how the Type 2 tape did, as well as the metal tape in the LX-5. This time, instead of recording at the minus 20 dB level, I recorded at the 0 dB level, which is the level I would normally record at. And that was both for the Type 2 and for the metal tape. The Type 2 tape ran out to about 22,000 hertz, which was very good. The whole spectrum was very flat from 20 hertz all the way up to 22. It actually ran even a little higher than that until it started to fall off some. The metal tape, it did a little bit better. Again, it was flat in most of the spectrum from 20 hertz up to the upper frequencies. But the metal tape, it extended out to about 24,000 hertz, plus or minus 3 dB or so. So it performed a little bit better. The Type 2 performed very well. And as you saw earlier, the Type 1 performed really good. So any of these three tapes in this tape deck will give you a good recording. So now it's time to get this LX-5 into one of my systems. This is what I do. I like bench testing whatever piece of equipment I'm working on. This happens to be a cassette deck, but it could be a receiver that I restored or an amplifier that I fixed or whatever. They eventually go into a system and I listen to them. And that's what I did with this LX-5. I went in, I replaced the belts, I made sure it performed well up on the test bench, but then it was time for it to do what it was made to do. And what I enjoy doing is making a little bit of music with them. And so I decided to bring them into my systems. A lot of times I'll compare them with other pieces of equipment that are similar. In this case, I have my Sony EL7L cassette deck. It'll make a great recording, and you can really enjoy music with them. And then I've got my Nakamichi Dragon. I thought that was appropriate. Put it in there with the LX-5, and let's see how it compares to that. And that's what I do a lot of times, is bring in several different pieces of equipment that are similar. Is a scientific no. Now it's time for your ears to take. Well, the LX-5 just tested out outstandingly. It held its own against the Dragon and the EL7. I couldn't tell the difference. I did some recordings off of vinyl. I did some recordings off of CD and just played them back and listened to them. And I wouldn't know which deck was playing if I didn't know which deck was playing. It's that simple. So the LX-5 is an outstanding cassette deck. If you've got one, you're not going to improve on it very much by going to any other format. And I have several open reel decks also, and they're outstanding, but this LX-5 will hold its own against any of them. If you enjoyed this video, I'd appreciate a thumbs up down below. For you non-subscribers, I'd really appreciate a subscription. And for my present subscribers, as always, thank you so much. You all have a good day.